which is good. So, yeah, thanks for coming. Look, I've looked down the attendee list. I can see handsome Tony from GT standing there and a few others. I'm probably a bit humbled here because about half the people on this list actually came up with the idea and helped us develop it. And I'm always just really probably humbled and proud that I get to run it. And every time we develop this stuff, we want to go the next step. Guess who we ring and guess who gives us a good idea. So thanks to those guys for coming along once again. We're just going to run through for anyone else that hasn't seen it, and even these guys where we've taken the program to at the moment. We used to be the professional ownership and driver wellbeing program, which PODW, which was all good, and we sort of had a bit of a name change through some negotiations and ideas we had along the way. But pretty much the guys that we've been working with a long time, we just regard their drivers as freight task managers, not just a steering wheel attendant, but we also class the whole industry as freight task managers as well. And I think the idea of this program here is that everybody in the industry understands, that's the sign language, Kirstin, you're driving, what's going on. And this is the little thing I show all the time. Every program we develop over the years, we've involved as many people as we can. And it's a known thing. That gives everyone ownership. If everyone's got ownership, they get engagement. It's not like other industries or else back at Vic Roads where we go out and just wave the big stick at people. Now we want people involved. And I can truly say this program here, so many people have been involved and no one's shy, I still see you, Tony, of ringing up and tell us if we got it wrong. So probably change that face. Anyway, so it's all good as we go forward. Probably the content of the program we've got, it runs for about 3 hours now. 3 hours is one of those timelines. It's hard to get drivers for more than 2 hours. 3 hours is a real push. 4 hours is almost impossible. The program pretty much used to run for a full half a day, but what we're finding was a lot of companies are actually writing the full day off once it got to 4 hours. Now, I will say it out here with the program, if you can give us 4 hours, if you book the session yourself and you can, we are happy to talk for 4 hours and put a lot more content in. No worries at all. That's easy for us. That's a pleasure for us. But otherwise, we do condense it down into 3 hours, which is good. And probably the number one thing is we've recognised, and thanks to all the guys in the room, you can't control what you don't understand. And that's been our secret all the way along, is actually understanding our issues. So one of the big things about the program is looking at the crashes we actually have, so everybody in the room understands what's going on. We basically talk a fair bit initially about heavy vehicle national law, the chapter 1A, the chapter that came in 2018, the safety duty, because this safety duty is absolute paramount. When that law actually came in, I got a smile on my face because I left enforcement regulation 4 years earlier when it was all about tickets, and suddenly they brought this safety duty in. And lo and behold, guess what? It's exactly what you guys have been doing for a number of years. We talk about the chain of responsibility, where your liability and prosecutions come in as well. And then we switch over after we've understood our industry, our crashes, where we sit in the law. That's where we bring Kirstin in. So I'll switch over to you, Kirstin.
Yeah, so I guess after having some conversations with Alan about the original rollover program, we started talking about what we're kind of condensing and calling the human factor. So thinking about the way that our drivers and operators can keep themselves safe inside of work and outside of work, and how these external factors influence their safety. So we touch on alcohol and other drugs and sleep cycles and sleep hygiene. I know a lot of training has been done in that space before, so we try to keep it quite brief and interactive. Again, knowing that a lot of the drivers are at the end of a busy day when we're meeting with them too. So doing a few little practical strategies around what is a drug, how long they stay in our system, things like that. And then we move more into, I guess, a cognitive space, thinking about how our brain works, how to maintain attention and concentration, and the mind's our trick place. We do talk a little bit about trauma as well, and we do some trip planning at the end. So kind of bringing everything together to give people a practical strategy on how to kind of encompass all of these factors that we bring into play.
Which is pretty good, yeah. The human factor has really come into it pretty much. It's come out of once again, because we work in the best industry in Australia. We share information. It's not about blaming. It's about understanding what's actually happened. And the human factor, with more and more data we've got out of EBS brakes and driver-facing cameras and forward-facing cameras and guardian machines, we've got a lot more info, and we're finding more people more and more often, more and more open about what's going on about stopping the next crashes. So we talk about the physical side of rollovers. I still punch an hour of pretty intense heavy vehicle rollover stuff down, so everybody in the industry understands what's going on with the crashes. We talk about other crashes as well, but really important as well, all these factors really go right across the industry. We've had unfortunately some bad crashes with our loader drivers and bush workers to and from work, our foresters as well doing the big hours on some fairly ordinary conditions and some challenging vehicles to drive. So the whole content really goes about that, because the principles at the end of the day are pretty much the same. If you're in a high risk environment than normal, you need to be better at what you do, and you need to do some more planning. So that's really important. And once we understand these crashes, we can really start to go back to where all the contributing factors come from. I spoke a bit before about Chapter 1A of the Heavy Vehicle National Law. This is a new duty that's come in that aligns with work health and safety. And it simply says, the first bit of legislation you'll see is Chapter 1A, 26A, Principle of Shared Responsibility. And it says the safety of transport activities relating to a heavy vehicle is the shared responsibility in the chain of responsibility for a heavy vehicle. So that's just not saying we put it out the driver. It's everybody. It's from the time we start planning to cut the trees down to well after we deliver it, a whole lot of people and a whole lot of functions right through that transport chain can actually really influence the contributing factors to the drivers. We also talk about 26C, the primary duty. This is the one, if something does go wrong, the one we're going to get prosecuted under. And it pretty much says each party in the chain of responsibility for a heavy vehicle must, so far as reasonably practicable, ensure the safety of the party's transport activities. One of the big things about reasonably practicable is understanding what's going on, but really make it clear that reasonably practical, if you have a hit, probably the first thing the regulator and the police are going to ask you for, were the people involved trained, were they competent, and can you prove it? So that's really important to understand as we go along. I just put it this way throughout the program, is looking at any transport chain. This is my little silo model where people tend to work in silos. Chapter 1A says you can't work in silos anymore. It says everybody, from the time we buy the land, plant the trees, cut them down, load them onto a truck, building our roads and take them to sawmills and chip mills and send them overseas, schedulers, operators, everybody in the transport chain has a duty to keep that truck driver in the middle there as safe as we can. We've been doing it for years. We've got the principle of it. It's now law. So once again, for you guys been involved for a long time, love it or hate it, but you've influenced the way the law works these days. And I'm actually pretty proud of it, even though it puts a bit of a burden on us, but we do it right anyway. And lo and behold, when you start talking about so far as reasonably practicable, there's words in there talk about known or ought reasonably to have known. So our friends at the regulator, you'll actually see some real synergy for you guys who've been involved with this for a long time. Have brought out what they call regulatory advices. And regulatory advice is telling people in the industry what the risks are and what we should be doing about it as far as chain of responsibility. And it's not always all about drivers. It can be about your office staff, your schedulers, your mechanics, and all of these things, which vehicle maintenance is in the Heavy Vehicle National Law. So these regulatory advices actually coming out. And the first one I'll show you, there's a lot of them now. Kirstin will show a heap more, is managing the risk of undertrained workers. And it pretty much says there, if you know you've got an issue and you haven't got the training and the skill set right, and you're not doing anything about it so far as reasonably practicable, you're well and truly open to prosecution. And that's the way it should be. And once again, that's why I'm so proud of the work we've done over the years, because as soon as we find a problem, we all get together, we throw some sort of training, the skill set in there and start to work on it. So it's saying there, if you're not doing it, if you didn't know you had to do it, well, guess what? There's a thing on their website to say you got it. So now you're new. And if you didn't know, you should have read it, because you ought reasonably to know. Anybody that has been through the program, you'll probably recognise this photo. It was actually, we're in Tasmania last week and a few people hadn't seen it. We go right through a crash. We break it down. You might have clicked this a few times, Kirstin, I think. Break it down to your marks and tyre slides and just keep clicking. Exactly what's going on. Then we give a bit of a case study of all the lead ups to these crashes, of where the contributing factors and pressure points come from. And by the end of that, plus some other stuff we do, so some case studies of crashes, people get a really good idea exactly what happens and why, where the pressure points come from, and it becomes pretty self-evident how we work together to remove that pressure and stop these crashes in the first time. I mean, one of the most outstanding things was actually realising what happens when a truck rolls over and why. We probably all thought we knew it, but once we actually could prove it, that way the whole industry then could move forward and to see the big change that we've had. So even if you have seen it before, you'll pick up something the next time we go through it. If you haven't, you'll be pretty fascinated and you'll understand why it's so important that we all work together. Okay, sorry, there's a lot there. We also talk about the forces involved in a rollover and a crash. We talk about 28.92 seconds, meters a second at 100 kilometers an hour. We talk about centrifugal force, center of gravity, dynamic loads, all these things, and where they come from, how they act on us and contribute to a crash. And really importantly, a lot of people sit back and think, I have some control over that part of the force. Maybe I can take the pressure on the driver. Simply when we talk about rollovers, it's pretty much a mathematical equation. And if you have some influence along the way and you understand what it is and you can make that a bit safer, that's fantastic. And of course, it's absolutely paramount that the drivers understand all this stuff as well as we go along. If you go back to that slide we had earlier with the slide with all the silos in it, don't go back there, Kirstin, but if I can visualize back there, you'll probably see, if you talk about center of gravity and centrifugal force, the driver, if they're given a truck, somebody else loads and they get told where to go, when to go, what time to go, what road to drive on, they have very, very little influence over the center of gravity. So it's important everybody else understands what the driver's about and we all work together. They have probably more influence over the sideways force through their driving style and speed. But we also, as an industry, we need to make sure the guys have got plenty of time and plenty of training in the right vehicle to manage that side of it as well. Once we've sort of done all that, the case studies start to come into it. And we do about 3 good case studies of just what happens in a crash, the contributing factors that led up to it, where they came from, what the driver was thinking. And there's a couple there we actually put there, which was probably actually 100% manageable if the driver had used some really good tactics. And we've always just got to remember, when you guys, it's the same as a lot of primary industries in Australia, when you're loaded high, we talk about heavy vehicle national law, mass dimension loading, speed and fatigue. Your guys are very likely to be on the outer limit of those laws all day, every day, right up to the last millimetre, right up to the last kilogram, possibly, hours of driving. They're legal, 100% they're legal. But when they're right at the top of their pins or the top of the tip of body, on some of those roads we send them down, their margin for error is very little. And probably the whole part of the bit where we're going to talk with Kirstin at the moment is making sure our drivers are not only well-trained, well-skilled, but their brains understand exactly what's working, that they can react in the appropriate amount of time and make the right decisions. And by working with the industry, we've come up with a few tactics, if you like, for the drivers to understand that. But the most important thing we got out of this, and once again, I'll go back to the guys, the operators who've driven trucks before, is Don't tell a truck driver to turn up and say, if you do this, you won't roll over. You explain what happens when a truck rolls over, why, where the force is coming from, and they'll figure it out themselves. If you come along and tell someone how to do this stuff without understanding how their brain works and why it's so important, it doesn't really work. When we first ran it, and the guys are sitting there, even when I was talking to Kirstin saying, why do we do trip planning? Why does it work so well? And she's done some real thoughts about it, ran some experiments, and then I said, that's how the brain works. That's why this is so damn important. And when you're running this second part of it, it's great for all our foresters and our safety managers. Some of them may have seen a bit of it before, they may not have, but man, does the penny click about halfway through why this stuff's really important. So as I said before, from my perspective, we haven't got steering wheel attendants. If you're just steering wheel attendants in this game, basically we've got some troubles. We need freight or freight task managers. And this, when you see the whole program, you understand it. The difference between a freight task management and somebody else just a steering wheel attendant is, in this game, what we do, one mistake can potentially kill you. So it means, and every load's going to be different. It just means every time we do a trip, it's got to be treated as an individual freight task. That's from the time we start planning it until we fold those trailers up at the end and go back and do it again. Because if there's a change and we fail to recognise that change, so much of our crash data and case studies shows that's when we have a crash. And that's where Kirstin comes in. Thanks, Kirstin.
So I guess we kind of start with the rollover program, and then a condensed version of the rollover program, and then I take the stage, starting to talk about the driver themselves and how their kind of behavior, how we can kind of sharpen their behavior. As Alan said, these guys often have, there's zero margin of error here, that they've got to be absolutely 100% sharp all the time, knowing that they're starting really early, they're working long hours. It's a really technically difficult job. So we want to make sure that we're giving them the education that actually works for them as well. So, the evolution of this program has really provided more and more, I guess, science than I would have ever anticipated, because I think it helps people to understand why we do the things that we do and why it's important for us to talk about all of these other human factors as well. So I do touch on drug and alcohol stuff. We talk about what a drug is, how it impacts on our central nervous system, how long they stay in our system for, and why they impact on driving as well. One of the key themes I constantly kind of fall back to is a difference between our perception and our reality, that a lot of stuff can be happening for us kind of unconsciously or chemically in our bodies without us actually having a really solid understanding of that too. So that's something that I kind of weave in throughout the parts that I speak about. So we speak about that certain drugs will stay in our system for longer, and what the implications of those things are, even if you're not actually experiencing the psychoactive effects of those drugs. And we also talk quite a lot about alcohol, because obviously alcohol is one of the ones that I would say 99% of people that come along consume. So we talk about how it impacts on us, and also Australia's tendency to underestimate what we're drinking and how much, and overestimate how quickly it gets out of our system as well. We also start talking about sleep a little bit in this section too, and really linking in, not just busting some myths about alcohol and sleep, but also linking in why it's really important for us to limit our alcohol use in terms of that sleep as well, and how it impacts on our sleep quality. I like busting myths as well. So we talk a bit about how much sleep people need every night, and how many truck drivers actually achieve that, and kind of that mismatch between what is optimal versus what is practical, and how we can kind of work around that as well. I kind of focus more around, if we can't get the quantity up, let's get the quality up, and talking about sleep hygiene and some ways of getting really good quality sleep, removing all of the physiological, physical and psychological barriers to that as well. I'm really zipping through my bit, but and then we kind of, so once we've done that, we kind of move from, okay, you're ready for work, you're primed, you're good to go. let's move into how the brain works as well. And as Alan said, really using case studies and things to talk about a real life example of a crash, an incident in which someone navigated an obstacle in the way that he would have normally, but his load had changed and therefore he had a rollover. So we talk about why that started to happen. So do a few little experiments that I won't spoil here. Talking about how our brain actually operates and why we might miss these changes in our environment, and why things like autopilot can happen to us as well, and why what we intuitively think, you know, when people are really good at something, they're really used to doing something, that often we kind of equate that to being safer. But we also talk about that having mastery and being really used to things can actually mean that we're more susceptible to this cognitive stuff as well, that autopilot is more likely to happen. And these kind of brain fart moments, scientific term, can happen a little bit more as well. So really starting to think about, well, how does our brain actually work? And why is it important for us to actively try to do things that maintain our concentration and attention, particularly when we're talking about those big changes in our environment? We kind of talk about, if anyone's done any psych, thinking about our mind like an iceberg. So thinking about all the conscious things that go on under the surface, and the importance of really putting them at the front of our brain to make sure that we are paying active attention to the really, really important stuff. And making sure that all of those changes and those safety procedures and everything are conscious and deliberate and really at the forefront of our mind. Apologies about the dogs in the background. And as Alan said as well, linking all of this in with the NHVR and heavy vehicle national law as well. So each section kind of, it's worked out very well. There's been regulatory advice coming out that really kind of feeds into what we're talking about. So I've popped a few of them up here now, but really thinking about our obligations, not only as drivers and operators, but also every person within the chain of responsibility, and making sure that everyone is aware of and of how their kind of behaviours and actions can influence other people and other people's safety at work too. We do talk about, I talk about trauma a little bit towards the end as well. And that was something that came out of feedback that I was getting from workers from the original kind of professional ownership and driver wellbeing program, that I would often get someone coming up to me at the end of a session and talking to me about a crash or an incident or something along those lines as well. So we started putting this stuff in here around, well, what does trauma look like? How do we act and why do we respond in particular ways when we're in a high stress or crisis kind of situation? What are the things that we can look for within ourselves and with other people? And just reminding people of the kind of cumulative effects of unchecked trauma as well. That for a lot of people, if they've had an incident, there is some evidence kind of coming out that you're more likely to see the effects of trauma months down the line as well, potentially even having another incident or hit further down the line. So we really want to focus in on that, providing, I'm really sorry, really looking at the mental health implications of being in an accident. I also talk about road trauma support services available in each state. And as I said, if people are coming and speaking to me afterwards, giving them some more local advice on how they can access some extra support, or where they can access some written resources, or think how they can support other people in the workplace too. There's also some regulatory advice coming out about mental health itself and around our physical health. So really looking at that holistic approach to safety, that it's not just about driver behaviour, but it's about all of the things that influence that as well.
Get off mute. Thanks, Kirst. It is interesting about the amount of regulatory advices that have come out from the regulator that align with this program. So the guys have been doing it for a long time. They've probably always been sitting pretty good with if they're going to get a prosecution about it so far as is reasonably practicable or due diligence. So it's probably a fairly handy thing to have as part of your safety management system. So once we've spoken about the crashes, where all the contributing factors come from, we're really starting to talk about everybody trying to make the driver's job safe as possible. We start to come down to the drivers themselves and some tools they can probably use. We talk about situational awareness in fairly lengthy sort of way, talk about time and space and put it into practical terms of what it actually means. Once again, going back to our particular crashes in the background. We give some tools about situational awareness, which have once again been out. Tony and Daryl's and all these guys around the country, guys, what do we do here? What's the best way to do this? Spoken to their driver trainers. We came up with some pretty good stuff, which I won't ruin today, but overall, people seem pretty happy with it. Just next one, thanks, guys. And we also talk about trip planning is a word we use. There's a lot of other stuff, but one of the big things we're finding, situational awareness is great, but you really need to understand what you've got in the first place. And some of the crashes we've had is people have simply changed what they've had or failed to identify something along the way. And a good freight task manager, as I was talking before, when I've been talking to our professional drivers, seriously, what sets these guys apart from the average driver is simply understanding what they've got. You can call it to drive into the conditions. I call it freight task management. Make sure they get home and identify their risks along the way. And this trip planning is probably one of the most important things. But we used to talk about that. By the time Kirstin's finished with all her psych tests and stuff like that with the guys, they understand why they do it, why it works, and they really start to take it on board. If you go to the next slide, we've actually developed a freight task management tool. Now, this tool here, it's not something you've got to use. We give everyone a copy. It's available on the website. It's about that, a combination of freight task management, which is situational awareness, and trip planning. This trip planning here is something I started doing with some of the operators listening in today. Probably 6 months after they did the rollover course, I'd simply jump in a truck with the guys and go out in the bush, and we'd start to say, right, do you understand what's going on? We start to break it down to themselves, their vehicles, their loads, the journeys. And we just ask a lot of questions along the way. Even the experienced drivers, so we say sometimes, guys, just grab this every 6 months and go through it, because what we found with a lot of the experienced guys is they forget they do it. And one day they may forget to actually, they may not pick something up, a change of hot load height, different product, the old, hardwood logs to pine logs or something like that, maybe new drive tyres on the truck, all these sorts of things. So this freight task management tool is really good. And we talk about situational awareness as well. Probably some of the driver trainers are starting to use this approach as well. They really understand that they know the drivers that have had a look, they've measured their load, they've assessed it, they understand the difference of a change of trucks and all this stuff away. So we've pretty much gone to big full circle to pull it all in the back together. We've understand what's going on, give everybody in the whole transport chain the opportunity to make the driver's job safer. And right at the end there, we're giving the drivers some tools that if something's not quite right or whatever, at least they should be able to manage their trip, their trip and their journey in a whole freight task management type scenario. And putting it all together, that's exactly how it's been working. Understand what's going on. You can't control what you don't understand. Certainly do that involvement, ownership, engagement type model. And realistically, where Kirstin's stuff comes in, this is stuff that's been really groundbreaking, is people understanding why we do it. Anything more from you, Kirstin? Finish off.
No, I think you've done well there. I guess, as you've said, we really try to tie it all together at the end and provide some practical ways of actually doing these things. And the freight task management tool is one of them. And there's some other things that we won't spoil. But some other strategies that we encourage people to do to really bring all of these things together to really try to reduce the incidence of the crashes that we are seeing. So that's pretty much it for us. I'm going to stop sharing. There we go.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Alan and Kirstin, to the opportunity for me to go through the program. I love that combination of both practical, this is what you have to do, but also then why it's important and what's going on behind that. I think that sounds like it should be really effective in terms of a learning regime. So just to be clear, it's not just for drivers. This is not a program just for drivers. This is a program for anyone within the chain of responsibility.
Anybody in the transport task, anyone with interest. We find sometimes that maybe the admin person in the work in the office come out and say, "Wow, I'm glad I did that because something we were doing or something I've been seeing." And that's when we first started doing the rollover program and knocking off the rollovers years ago. It was because everyone worked together, not because I was at the front. Everybody understood what's going on and they came together. So that was great. So more people get involved in this, the better. It really is important, and particularly management, because we're putting things in place here or suggesting tools, but the managers need to understand that maybe the guys do need a cat nap occasionally, or a power nap as we call it, or some other thing. So more people, the better. And once again, if you just look at the chain of responsibility side of it, due diligence, they should be doing this stuff anyway. So we just do it for them.
Yeah.
And we do kind of.
Well, and undoubtedly, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, we do, depending on the kind of mix in the room, like if we've got a lot of drivers, then we'll really focus on those driver behaviours. If we've got more, say, management or admin or, support staff, then we'll focus on some other things as well. So we do try to kind of, the content's pretty similar, but we might highlight some stuff compared to others, depending on what people have seen before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could really tailor a program specifically for an organisation.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Fantastic. Yeah. So I will open the floor to questions. So if anyone on the call has a question, pop it in the chat or raise your hand. So Alan, how does this content then align actually with heavy vehicle law? And does it just sort of slot straight into a safety management program?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, pretty much heavy vehicle law, that chapter 1A really talks about that safety duty of understanding what your crashes are and working together. So this is something we've done. We've identified our own crashes as an industry, and we were the first industry around Australia to do this, as a whole, thanks to AFCA, and just great operators. So, if you know you've got a rollover problem, well, you do something about it. You do the training, you do everything else around it. It's all documented. It's good. So yeah, it just fits in beautifully. And look, I'll just say, I've just had the opportunity to work with the milk tanker industry and NTI Insurance on a regulator funded program. At the end of the day, the freight task management concept to these guys was totally foreign, and it's a bit different for those guys, but they'd done nothing like this ever before. They really hadn't as a whole. So basically the regulator's starting to see what we're doing here is really, really good. And we cover ourselves under the law, pretty nicely through it.
And I think that's a really important point, and some good feedback that we can put through, that if the regulators are seeing that people have gone through this program and then maybe this is my own lack of knowledge coming out, but where their sort of compliance regimes might come into play, or potentially having a conversation with your insurance provider or your finance provider to say, well, these are the business systems and processes that we've put in place for safety, and have a negotiation around that, or others with you in the contract scheme. Alex.
Yeah, hi. Hey again, Alan. We spoke earlier in the
week. Alex, yeah, there you are.
Just a question, Tim and/or Therese. Is this program being run directly through AFCA, or can non-AFCA members non-AFCA members also attend?
Yep. So, hi, Alex.
Hello.
It's actually open to all industries.
Sure.
So it's all industries and non-members as well as members.
Okay.
The only difference is that the cost does vary. We do offer a $20 discount to our members, but that's an incentive for the membership, of course. And it's open to all industries, not just forestry.
Yep.
So it's
Yep.
just transport across
Okay.
the board.
Very good. I think that probably aligns pretty well then, Alan. I had spoke to Alan about just in terms of the native forest industry in Queensland, and instead of getting Alan to come up 4 or 5 times for from a plantation perspective, and then different pieces, if we did just have one training, if it's in person, and a range of people can attend.
Further to that, you don't have to book a session. The minimum requirement to run a session is 20 people per session. I have scheduled, and it's on our website. I'll send the link around. There are sessions scheduled throughout New South Wales and Queensland, and over to WA as well. We did have sessions booked for Queensland, but we just didn't have the numbers to run it so close to launch. But we've rescheduled those in February. But you can also, if companies wanted to book a dedicated session, we can accommodate that as well.
Okay, awesome.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, no, that's good. So for those on the call, we will be also sort of encouraging you to spread the word throughout your networks. As I mentioned at the start, this is a terrific program. We're really proud of it. It's so important to focus on this safety piece and build all of our own awareness and understanding. So the more that people that we can get it through the program, the more people that we can get trained up, I think that's a great thing. And as we said, so you don't have to even be involved in forestry, don't actually have to even be directly involved in the sort of trucking. If you're engaged in that logistics chain in any way, as a user, as a provider, as a supplier. Any other questions? Now, Therese, I think that you probably have been taking some. Was there any common themes that have come out as we've been promoting the program?
Yeah, there have been a couple that have actually sat in the PODW course previously, and that was actually an NHBR funded program, so there was no cost to attendees. That funding has ceased, and we've actually, as Alan's already gone through, incorporated the rollover program as well. So to make it viable to put out to industry, there is a charge per attendee now. So a lot of people get a bit confused by that, but that's the reason why. The other two was, I actually answered in Alex's question, was that the program is designed not just for forestry, for all industries. And the other one as well was regarding the session. So you can either book a dedicated session, or we do have the dates on our website. And as I said, I'll circulate those after the webinar.
Wonderful. Thanks, Therese. Now, I think that we're scheduled to finish up in a couple of minutes. So, Alan and Kirstin, I'll just throw back to you in case there was anything else that you needed or wanted to throw in at this stage.
No, I'm pretty right. I think I've said it all. And once again, for those guys listening in that have helped out, thank you. Thank you. That's great. And it's good to see other industries starting to get the idea about how good you guys are, which is great.
Yeah, and I echo that. Nothing more from me, but yeah, thank you to everyone who has provided feedback and suggestions along the way. We want to make sure that it is constantly kind of evolving and making sure that it's relevant for people. So it's been great having such a, the industry is so collaborative and involved, and it's really cool to be able to deliver a program to an industry that really, prioritizes this stuff and wants to make sure that everyone gets home safe at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I don't think that there's any more important task that we have than making sure that people get home in the condition with which they left home in the morning, which is the most important thing that we should do. Okay, so thank you all very much for your time this afternoon. I hope you found this valuable. Therese will be sending out a sort of evaluation form and a link to the booking site. We'll be looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible on a program as soon as possible. Please do spread the word throughout your networks. If you are looking for or would be interested in a sort of specific program, whether that's for the sort of native Timber Queensland type of stuff, or organisationally, just get in touch with us, and then we can negotiate and talk about how we actually deliver that and get it out there. I think that's probably it from me. Please feel free to get in touch with myself or Therese if you do have feedback or need any more information, or indeed Alan and Kirstin as well. So with that, I'll draw it to a close. Thank you all very much for your time, and please enjoy your evening.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
To the minute.
Thank you.
Yeah.